Good morning, Assalamu alaikum, and welcome to our special event on International Women's Day, Let Her Learn, Empowering Women and Girls Through Education. Before we start our panel discussion, we would like to begin our event by acknowledging the Gadigal people of Eora Nation as the traditional custodian of the land on which we are organizing our gathering. I pay my respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging. As a refugee, I would like to pay my gratitude to the First Nation people for allowing me to seek protection on their land so I can enjoy my fundamental human rights and freedom. I understand the importance of justice as well as reconciliation to build a nation and move forward. As an Afghan man, I would also like to acknowledge the injustices inflicted on women and girls by the patriarchal culture and the barbaric regime in Afghanistan. I'm sorry for that and hope we can change the situation soon. I stand in solidarity with all women who are struggling for their fundamental human rights, including Afghanistan, Iran, Gaza, and everywhere else. I again welcome all of you to our special event on International Women's Day. Happy International Women's Day to all of you who are here and joining us online. Thank you very much.
My name is Rita Anwari. I am speaking as the director of the Edmund Rice Centre to welcome all of you here in the centre. It's such good to see such a good turnout here at the centre. We're a small room, but we've got lots of people here, which is great. It's also wonderful to have all of those online. Welcome to you, all of you online to this event. I have to thank Farid and Jafar in particular for all their effort in helping to put this event together, along with Corinne and the rest of the people involved in this event. The Edmund Rice Centre has been a centre that at its heart has always been about social justice, about being a way in which we can provide a voice and platform for those we walk alongside, whether it's First Nations people, whether it's Pacific peoples in the region facing climate change, or whether it's refugees and people seeking asylum. That has been the history of the centre and will continue being part of our work. We are now part of ERCS that has at its heart 4 key issues: dignity, integrity, liberation, and justice. Those 4 themes are very much part of what International Women's Day is all about. And it's wonderful to have Andree Brown here as the head of Edmund Rice Community Services participating in today's dialogue. But I thought I could just take a step a little bit back, if you'll allow me, to talk a little bit about the history of International Women's Day, which I was fascinated by because it spoke to some themes which were very similar to themes that we have in our history as an Edmund Rice Centre. So IWD, originally known as National Women's Day, was first proposed by Teresa Malkiel and was inspired by a protest purportedly by women garment workers on March the 8th in 1857. It then became an international movement with an International Women's Day officially marked by more than 1 million people in Austria, Denmark, Germany, and Switzerland on March 19th, 1911. In 1913, women went on strike in Russia for what became known as Bread and Peace, a protest that happened on March the 8th and was one of the many events leading to the events of 1917. Eventually, March 8th was declared by the UN the Day for Women's Rights and Peace in 1977. The reason for giving this pitted history of IWD is to place its context not just as an international day of recognition of the ongoing struggle women face in the world, but also as a reminder of the solidarity and alignment the Edmund Rice Centre for Justice and the Edmund Rice legacy has with the movement. With the importance of dignity, integrity, liberation, and justice, as I mentioned, being part of that. While Edmund Rice focused his efforts on liberating impoverished young boys, and men from the injustice, poverty, and oppression they faced in their day under the yoke of imperialism and the penal laws in Ireland. His inspiration for focusing on education came through the model developed by a woman called Najeebah, who did the same process in Ireland before him in educating young women to be lifted up out of poverty. And it is a wonderful legacy to be part of, and something I'm very proud to be part of, something 200 years later that is focusing on this. So educating girls and boys was seen as the best path to liberating them in the face of social injustice in the world at that time. And it continues to be an important part of liberating people in the world we live in now. So I'm very happy now to hand over to my colleague, Corinne, who will take forward the discussion. Corinne, over to you to introduce our speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alopi and Farid. I want to welcome all of my sisters to this day today, to this very special day, and I'm honored to be spending it with you all. And I also want to welcome all of the men today for your support in our journey to better opportunity and to freedom and to achieving our human rights and our potential as women. This panel will be, of course, about the empowerment of women and girls through education. Education is good for women, of course. Under the United Nations Declaration on Human Rights, both women and men have a fundamental right to education. But the education of women has also been very closely linked to a peaceful society, to a thriving society. So education is not only good for women, it's good for everybody. Today, we have is Rita online yet? I think we may have one of our panelists with some difficulty in joining. But so in this case, we have 3 panelists joining us, and I'm very honored to be introducing them. Of course, the issues that women face in terms of their education vary widely depending on their geographical location, cultural background, and socioeconomic background. So today we have a panelist from Australia, whom I'll introduce in a minute. And we've got Azam from Iran originally, and Najeebah, who joins us as a former refugee from Afghanistan. And I'll introduce each of those in a minute. The structure of the panel will basically be a facilitated conversation through questions. And then at the end, we'll have an opportunity for you as part of the audience to ask some questions as well. And we hope to leave at least 15 to 20 minutes for that to occur, because that's often a really interesting part of an event. And afterwards, for those who join us in person today, we have a light lunch for you to enjoy as well. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists in alphabetical order. So we've got online, Andree Brown. Andree is the Executive Director of Edmund Rice Community Services, which Edmund Rice Centre is now a part of. And Andree brings over 30 years experience engaging with people and organisations passionate about facilitating change for good. Andree has built a substantial knowledge base regarding what works in walking alongside others to help them create their own success, and how agencies and programs position themselves for the best possible outcomes and impact. Andree's academic focus has been on the effect and impact of early intervention practices, particularly on young people and their families. Azam Sadeghpour, sitting right next to me. Welcome, Azam. Thank you. Azam was born in 1979 into a politically active family in Iran. She witnessed the atrocities committed by the Iranian regime and during the loss of family members. Fleeing Iran at the age of 18, Azam sought refuge in Pakistan for nearly 2 years, escaping persecution and seeking safety. Despite those challenges, Azam remained resilient and pursued her education in the field of IT. She utilized her skills and expertise to become a director in a major consulting firm and took on multiple leadership roles in the education sector in the field of data and analytics. Azam joins us as the spokesperson for the Iranian Women's Association in Australia. In addition to her professional endeavors, Azam is a devoted wife and mum, cherishing her family while also advocating for women's rights and equality. Welcome. Thanks. Najeebah Wasefadost, joins us on. Najeebah is a refugee from Afghanistan who has graduated with a Bachelor of Medical Science. Najeebah is the founder of the Global Refugee Network and the Asia Pacific Network of Refugees. Najeebah has been actively involved in the development of refugee-led networks at both the regional and global level. Najeebah is an advocate, educator, public speaker, and researcher. She's been a gender audit to the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. Ensuring gender equality and the empowerment of refugee and migrant women remains a top priority commitment for Najeebah. Now, I'll just check again whether Rita is online. If you are, Rita, can you give us a sign? No, okay. We hope that Rita is okay, and maybe she'll be joining us later on. Welcome to all our panelists. And I'll start with the first question to you, Najeebah. Given the challenging circumstances in your home country of Afghanistan, often considered one of the most difficult places in the world for women and girls, I'd like to begin our discussion with you and ask you if you could please provide us some insight into the specific challenges faced by women and girls in Afghanistan and how these challenges compare to those experienced by women in Australia. Over to you, Najeebah.
Thank you very much, Karen. So as I was introduced, my name is Najeebah, and good morning. First of all, I want to thank you all for having me on this profoundly meaningful International Women's Day this year, where the theme is inspiring inclusion. So I stand here today as a woman whose journey really reflects, that very heart of inclusion and resilience. I do come from Afghanistan, and I'm sure most of you, who's here to online or sitting in the room knows of what this country is actually experiencing, especially after the crisis started back in August in 2021. It's a country, it's a land scarred by conflict and turmoil. So my story is not just mine, it is a narrative of strength that women can summon even in the face of unimaginable challenges. So as a refugee myself, I carried not just the weight of my past, but also the hope for a better future. In my new home, Australia, which I feel myself quite privileged and lucky, I also became more than a survivor. I became a force for change, co-founding the Refugee Women-led network, named the Asia Pacific Network of Refugees, commonly known as APNOR. I've dedicated myself to creating a space, where the voices of refugee women are not drowned out by the challenges we face, but also serves as a call to action. Most often when I talk to my own, women colleagues, when I talk to my own women friends, when I talk to my community women, we always tend to hear that, most often women are actually identified as vulnerable people. But the reality is that we are not vulnerable. It's the actual situation that makes us vulnerable. So it's really about looking at the circumstances and the situation that women are being put in. So being internally displaced from birth, the path to becoming a refugee woman advocate, to be honest, was not a choice for me. but an innate part of my existence. Every time someone asks me, Najeebah, how did you become a refugee woman advocate? I said, sorry, it wasn't my choice. It really goes back to my own lived experience. I learned to fight against injustice, to resist the oppression and to persist in the face of adversity. My personal motivation stems from that deep-seated belief in the inherent dignity and rights that every individual, regardless of their circumstances or their gender. So now, when I try to look at the challenges that our women face in Afghanistan, from having no access to education, no access to employment, and more importantly, as some of you and most of you might know in this room, is that right now, as we are celebrating International Women's Day, as we are here in Australia, there are millions of Afghan women in the country are abandoned and imprisoned just because of their own gender. At least before 2021, we have had some of our rights being, some of our rights through education and employment, but unfortunately, all of those have been taken away as the Taliban has come in. So we're literally looking at women being in prison of their own sex, and having access and being able to talk to all of those women on an everyday basis. I think one thing that they're saying is that they're no longer having a voice. It was just last week, that I was speaking to one of our young women who we were supporting through education. And she said, Najeebah, for so many years, I was always looking at my books and pens and stationeries around me. But now what I'm being taught at home by my parents is how to actually turn all of those into weapons to actually self-defense myself against torture or trauma or rape. So it's really becoming a very difficult situation for Afghan women that are in Afghanistan, and even those who have been able to, flee through the borders and make it to Pakistan and Iran. And again, we are working with many of them in those transit countries, and their challenge is still the same. Many of them are having no legal status, they're having no travel rights. It's quite difficult for them to actually survive while they have no rights as asylum seekers in those transit countries, and facing, the risk of deportation every day. So the challenge still exists. So now, let me tell you, when I compare these challenges faced by Afghan women, by women and girls in Afghanistan to those in Australia, that these parties are stark. In Afghanistan, obviously, women are confronted with systemic barriers to education, as I mentioned, restricted and limited opportunities to personal and professional development. These challenges are actually increased and exacerbated by turbulent political landscape and deeply ingrained cultural norms that perpetuates gender inequality. While in Australia, and having had the privilege of seeking asylum here in this country, I do tend to see that women generally enjoys greater freedom and opportunities. It is essential, though, to acknowledge that challenges even persist here. Gender-based violence, pay gaps, and underrepresentation in leadership positions in Australia are issues that demand our attention and concerted efforts for change. So this comparative analysis serves not as a dismissal of the struggles in Australia, but as an acknowledgement that the fight for gender equality is a universal endeavor. So it's not going to only happen in Afghanistan or in Australia, it's actually across the world. It is a call to arms, urging us to use the understanding of diverse challenges as a catalyst for global change. So my personal experience in Afghanistan and as a refugee advocate fueled my determination to bridge these gaps. Despite these challenges, just like many other refugee women, I would say the resilience and determination of many forcibly displaced women has also inspired me to continue this journey. Their stories of courage and perseverance serves as a constant reminder of the importance of our work. And we've just heard, even our colleague, the Iranian woman, Azam, when I heard her bio, I was like, wow, that's another way of us being driving myself, forward, even in the most challenging of times. So I would like to end by stating that let this conversation be the catalyst for transformative action, where we are able, to look at ways of dismantling these barriers, the challenging norms, and create a world where the inherent rights and dignity of every woman, whether you're in Australia or Afghanistan or Bangladesh or Thai-Burma border, it doesn't matter where you are, that the dignity and the rights of every woman are not just acknowledged, but fiercely protected. And I give it back to you, Karen. Thank you.
Thanks, Najeebah. Passion is coming across the screen into this room. Najeebah, can I ask you a further question on that? What you're talking about is the importance of solidarity across the globe between women and men supporting women in the fight for equal opportunity and basic human rights. I want to ask you, I was reading recently a deep critique of the West in the way that it has responded to the current situation in Afghanistan and failed in its support of women in Afghanistan under the current regime. The article also mentioned that not everyone in the Taliban has the same opinion that women shouldn't access education at all. Are you able to give us a little bit of insight?
I think it's an important topic that you touch base, Karen. First of all, I would like to say that solidarity amongst women is a powerful force when it comes to fighting against inequality. It's so important for us as women to be able to support each other and empower one another when it comes to facing challenging circumstances. And I couldn't agree more with you, Karen. And I think it was either Farid or Azam that started, or I think our other colleague that we're talking about, in this journey, we're not only looking at our women as being our allies and supporters, but how important it is for our brothers, for our men, to also walk us through these challenging circumstances. So for me, I think going back to Afghanistan, it becomes even more crucial in the face of challenging circumstances, such as the current, such as under the current regime of the Taliban, who the importance of solidarity cannot be overstated, especially when they critique the Western response to the situation. So what I would like to say by that is that most often, since the crisis started back in August in 2021, we tend to hear a diverse response to the situation of women, and that really goes back, that really goes back to the political challenges that we are facing. So, who is actually driving the change in the country right now? It's a very male-dominated society, and when we look at those, the big majority of men in the country, there are still the people who come to the mindset that they believe the woman needs to stay at home. They still come with the belief that women should have limited access to public participation, and they are the ones that believe that women should have no access to employment. So in here, the solidarity becomes quite important. It creates a collective strength that empowers women to stand together, to speak up and demand for their rights. And for that, I would say empowerment through unity. We go through a very, I would say one size doesn't fit all in the whole country. When we look at Kabul right now in this situation, we still have some resilient women, some powerful women that beyond every restriction, they're still trying to create a space for themselves to have a voice, to have some level of access to education, to have some level of access to employment. But in the majority states all over the country, most of voices have been abandoned. Most of them have become silent. So there's no longer, an opportunity for them to raise their issues. So in such, I think, circumstances, again, I would like to emphasize a few things. One, by fostering a sense of unity, we can overcome the isolation and fear that oppressive regime often use to maintain control. We have a very heavy control of how information is being distributed. We have a very heavy control of how women, if they do voice their stories, how the stories are to be narrated and shaped, so that can impact the Western world. And I think what's even more important is that we should be able to amplify individual voices, women voices, into a harmonious chorus. And what I mean by that, making it harder for those in power to ignore the calls to injustice and, to justice and equality. So again, most often when we talk about providing a platform for women to share their experiences, we tend to hear, from the Taliban regime or from the local leaders in Afghanistan who are, again, part of the Taliban, they actually say that the women already have a power to share the experience. They already have a platform to share the experiences. They can talk as long as they covered their face from head to toe, but not realizing that they're still restricting women's choices to how they want to appear in the society. So it's really about building resilience. But I think what I want to end with the critics that the Western response to the situation in Afghanistan is a necessary exercise that we need to challenge, because not all is right and not all is wrong. What I would like to say that's important is for us to be able to also promote solidarity amongst refugee women, amongst Afghan women and the Western women here, for example, in Australia, and use their voices as a way to create a civil conversation, to create a platform where women can be heard. So I would say solidarity amongst Afghan and Australian women and many other Western women can serve as a catalyst for constructive criticism, pushing for more thoughtful and effective interventions that address the root causes of inequality. And I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thanks, Najeebah. I want to welcome Rita, whom I think has joined us. And I want to introduce Rita quickly. Rita Anwari serves as the founding president of the Afghanistan Australia Chamber of Commerce and Investment, and is also the chief executive of Women Empowerment and Leadership. Rita, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Thanks for having me.
We're honored to have you, and thanks for joining us. Rita, I asked Najeebah about the situation of Afghani women in Afghanistan at the moment. And I also asked Najeebah about how the West can actually help with regards to advancing the rights of women in Afghanistan, because the West has, in a way, abandoned Afghanistan and is refusing to work with the Taliban at all regarding this issue and others. So I'm just wondering whether you can share some of your thoughts and insights about that.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to acknowledge all the wonderful ladies and gentlemen here in the line with us. And from deep inside of my heart, I would like to present as Australian Afghan women, say Happy International Women's Day to all women around of the world, especially the women of Afghanistan, which is they don't have a voice in a highly specific day to call International Women's Day. And hopefully those women out of Afghanistan, they be voice for them and try to advocate to get their voice in international committee. First of all, I would like to acknowledge my sister Najeebah, and unfortunately, I just came in the middle of her speech because technical issue. When we're going back to Afghanistan, I left Afghanistan 33 years ago, so almost over 3 decades. But still, my blood connecting with Afghanistan very deeply, and women of Afghanistan. And I've traveled twice for a very short time in Afghanistan. And even like before the Taliban come up, Afghan women in Afghanistan, they had so much issue, so much isolation in society. But right now, we put it this way, they don't have anything by name of the woman or respect for a woman in that country. To how we describe the country, women are not allowed to hold a pen or stand for themselves, to get education, which is the first right of any human in planet, to have a right to get self-education. But this country, they don't have any right to self-educate themselves. So from after 15th of August, we try a lot to help Afghan women to raise their voice, but it's still not enough because international committee is not still working with us. It's still going very slowly, as which we wanted. It's been 4 years. The girl, she was 10 years old, now she's 14 years old. Been 4 years took out of their education life. Think about it. This is the time which is a child getting progress, and the brain is like a sponge. They're taking the education on their brain. They develop their education system in their brain. And we sitting silent, we can't do anything. We have got over 1 million Afghan out of Afghanistan. most of them very powerful, they've got a voice. And I'm asking continuously, come out and speak out behalf of those Afghan children in Afghanistan, to give them that opportunity back. I have seen my sister Najeebah and a couple of other sisters back in the United Nations. They fight very strongly and very proudly. I'm very proud of them, but still, international community is not listening to us. I know the main source of this movement, Afghanistan, there was the negotiation of not just on the Afghan government, former government, but there was international committee made a decision to hand over Afghanistan to Taliban. But the question is, why they not consider Afghan women on that situation? I remember the day when they had a conversation in Doha. They said Afghan will be part of this negotiation. They will have a part in the government and their government, and their voice will be heard. But where's this conversation? Why the international community not asking these questions? Where's that negotiation we had? The only people suffering in Afghanistan is Afghan women. Most of them is the children, the young girl, which is now age of 14, which is the main time of them to receive education. I worked for many years, for almost 7 years, to take Australian education to Afghanistan. My old work has gone back to drain. I was the first Afghan woman to take Australian full education back in Afghanistan, 27 years. Actually put the culture of online training. So very strongly, we work with Afghan women to give them Western culture, Western education, but unfortunately, that Western community is not supporting us back to get their voice back in the international community. This is my main concern in Afghanistan. Of course, I haven't been grown up in Afghanistan, but we see every day what's happening over there. Today is an International Women's Day. Even we don't have one Afghan woman back from Afghanistan live with us because they're not allowed to. They don't feel safe. Why a human should live like that?
Yeah,
that's my main concern.
Yeah, thanks, Rita. There's obviously a lot more than the West that the West can do, and thanks for highlighting that issue, Rita.
Just one thing, so I want to have it continuously. I'm actually mentioning it all every single event when I sit up. Why these things does not move a little bit faster? Why this voice is not getting heard? We know the Congress representatives are speaking about it, and United Nations, women from around of the world, but why don't getting this as a consideration? This is the questions always behind of my mind. Why is not happening?
Yeah. Thanks, Rita. I'm afraid I don't have an answer.
I hope this voices can be get back to somewhere. Somebody can answer? I'm pretty much sure no one has have answer, but this voice can be the voice of Afghan women. Somebody can listen to this thing.
Yeah, thanks, Rita. We're now going to turn to Azam and to the situation of women in Iran. We know that there are restrictions on women's rights in Iran as well, although Afghanistan is the only country in the world that has banned education for girls over the age of 11, the only country in the world. But the situation for women in Iran is also problematic. Yeah. And I wonder whether you can give us an insight into the current situation for women in Iran, with specific reference to education, of course.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Before I start, great to be here and be part of this incredible day. And درود بر دوستای ایرانی and افغانی and روز زن به شما تبریک میگم. I think I'm getting emotional listening to Najeebah and Rita, and yes, the situation is different from Afghanistan to Iran, but as I'm sure you're aware the situation in Iran is also really dire for everyone, especially women, that every day facing challenges with education, with participation in politics. And basically, I think, as Rita and Najeebah may have touched on, it's really difficult for a lot of Australians here to actually understand the repression and the lack of freedom and basic rights that the Iranian women face in Iran. There's no, again, different, but there's no freedom of speech. There's no choice of dress or limited choice of dress. People are women are not allowed to participate in any political activities. So I think, and in some areas, women and young girls are being sold in underage marriages. So I think, and we saw that in September 2022, Mahsa Amini, who was basically killed because some men on the Iranian regime thought that she's not covered accurately. And that was enough reason for her to die. So I think, that created this uprising in Iranian women. They were at the, I guess, front of the line. They very courageous, put their lives on the line. And I think most of them, they removed hijabs just as a symbol to show that they are going against the dictatorship. And I think it was really inspiring for me because, you mentioned that I've been here for a really, really long time, and I've tried to basically take a route of becoming educated, and maybe that way I can contribute. But I think, it inspired me and a lot of people around the world to see this woman, how courageous and brave this women are. But unfortunately, since those events happened, things really, gotten even worse. We've got 750 protesters killed. We've got 20,000 protesters being arrested in Iran. So I think International Women's Day and what that means to me is it's a great opportunity. I know we can't do much, but I think to just basically reflect and acknowledge and celebrate the bravery and of those women in Iran, in Afghanistan, in a lot of other countries. And basically, honestly, I can't speak on behalf of Iranian women living in Iran or, Afghanistan, but I do hope, I really only wish that this day brings them hope that they can, they are making progress, and we are here to support and hopefully achieve some change.
I was reading recently that even though women do access education in Iran, they go to universities, they don't necessarily find jobs.
That's exactly right. Yeah, actually, I was going to touch on that. Yes, Iranian, I'm one of the families that my mom always was education first, and we had that as the core of, I guess, our, growing up. And I think there was I don't want to misquote that, but I think there's a big number that 60% of university students are women. So they love to learn and they drive themselves. But, as you mentioned, if they can afford to go university or they accepted in universities, they graduate, and after that, there's no jobs. And I think that's the problem. That's why women are fed up in Iran. And that's why they were, at the front of this whole movement, because there's no way out for them. Even though the access to education is much better than, unfortunately in, Afghanistan. But there's no job because of the economy and everything else that dictatorship is forcing on people.
Thanks, Azam.
Thank you.
I want to come to you, Andree, and listening to everything, and trying to to get from you how you understand the mission of Edmund Rice organizations and Edmund Rice-led organizations, because admin rights organizations have a global presence, and they also have a link through Admin Rights International to the United Nations. So I wonder whether you could shed some light on the strategies that admin rights organizations employ to address gender injustice. And, you know, if you can tell us a little bit more about your perspective on gender issues in Australia.
Thank you very much, Corinne. I hope you can hear me okay.
Yep.
Terrific. And thank you to the panel so far. It's been wonderful to hear your voices, and I stand in solidarity and hope with you for women. I just want to start by sharing with you that the arc of solidarity is also over time, and I just wanted to acknowledge my great-great-grandmother. I hope you can see her on the screen at the moment. She was, her name is Elizabeth Ann Taunton, and she eloped with the gardener James Ellis in the late 1880s. They lived in Dorset in England, and in 1886, a speaker from the Bristol League, the Women's Liberal Association, came to recruit members, and she was part of the suffragette movement then. In 1888, a march took place from Land's End in Cornwall, in the very west of England, to London. She marched and caught the train from Bristol to London and was part of those protests. She wasn't arrested at the time, but when she returned to her village, she was ostracised, had horse manure thrown at the house, and was branded a social misfit, essentially for the rest of her life. My auntie had her green and white and purple sash and badges of the movement for many, many years, but sold them to a house-to-house buyer. Unfortunately, we've lost them from the family. But I just wanted to acknowledge that the movement and the struggle for women from those times has projected for me into this role, and I'm very proud to say that passion for dignity and justice continues for me personally. And so you asked me a little bit about the Edmund Rice movement and its role. As Alopi said, and thank you, Alopi, for the introduction, that was a great summary of some of the positioning that we have as an Edmund Rice movement. We are very much inspired by his particular story, and as Alopi indicated, he took the lead, Edmund Rice in his time, took the lead from women around him, particularly in accessing education in a certain way for children who had no access to education. And we continue that, the manner in which he went about it, he and Nan O'Nagel, and that is that we embed ourselves and deeply listen to people in their communities. We try to understand what it is that's important for them, and then how do we walk alongside people to ensure that their dignity and rights are maintained as we try and change the paradigms and the injustice that people find themselves in. And so whilst that's happening around the world in different ways, for us at Edmund Rice Community Services, what we do across Australia and in an international focus through the Edmund Rice Centre is to act in two ways. Our mission has a voice. So we have two components to that as well. Our justice and advocacy work is to raise the voices of women. And I'm very proud to be a female executive director of an organisation that has come from a predominantly male environment. They understand and live the value of women in this organisation. So that is also projected through the missions work that we have. We do webinars like this, but also across other components of our organisation. We have women in leadership, and we raise voices of the women who we walk beside. A lot of those are young women and and children, and we listen actively to what they are saying to us about what they value in their communities, particularly in Australia. And I'm just acknowledging the work in the South Pacific that Corinne has been involved in the past to raise the voice of women in climate change across the South Pacific. We also, the second part of our approach with our mission for gender equity is in our service delivery, particularly around participation of women in activities and children in their access to recreation and sport. We work with schools and identify conversations, not just with young women, but young men, around cultural bias that they may carry about women's participation, girls' participation in education and sport. And I'll give you an example, and this comes into my approach to gender issues in Australia. And that is the women in sport, and I'll talk about the Matildas for a little minute. When you're on a soccer pitch with a bunch of young people and they're all playing together, we've had a number of female instructors and young men will often say to them, "I'm not going to play with you because you can't beat me." And so then that opens up, in the manner in which we choose to operate, a conversation about how women's participation in sport is important, and that conversations with those young men on the soccer field as they're playing is sometimes the most impactful time to have to talk about it, rather than sitting down with them in a separate place. So we're really cognizant of how cultural bias in Australia is driving some of the gender injustices that exist for us. Certainly, listening to the rest of our panel, we might consider that we're very fortunate here in Australia that we don't have to have the heart-wrenching traumatic experiences around trying to access just those basic human rights. We have those here. What happens for us here is that we generally have lower pay because the predominant jobs that women take are not valued by our community as much as jobs that most men tend to take. We also know that we are pushed to try and have it all. You know, we can get jobs, have families, do everything, but at the same time, we tend to still maintain all of the domestic and caring duties in our own lives, and the pressure that's put on us as women as we try to do and be active participants in an Australian community. We don't really acknowledge sometimes that the choices that some women make are worthy choices if they choose to do something that is seen often as a traditional conservative way of expressing themselves in Australian communities. I also just want to touch on domestic violence and coercive control. That seems to be a growing and worrying component of our culture, particularly with young men. I have 4 young adult children, and they were telling me late last year that if a young girl receives a message from a young male that says, "Make me a sandwich," it actually means, "I don't value you as my equal and I want you to get back in the kitchen." So there's this actual little saying that just young men can make me a sandwich, and they all know what this means. It's about oppressing women's advancement as young people in our culture. So I think there are things like that we need to pay attention to and try and understand. I certainly celebrate some of the moves that we're making, particularly in our political environment federally. We have some wonderful leadership happening, and I just wanted to acknowledge that I saw Penny Wong has been celebrated as the longest serving female senator in Australia. So I just wanted to acknowledge that too. So we do have opportunity here, but I think we have a long way to go in that subculture that's emerging around control and women's women's place in Australian culture. One more I just want to quickly mention in relation to that is the sexualisation of young girls and women on social media and the images that our young girls are pressured to try and weigh up around how they present themselves in that environment that is so important to most young people in our Australian culture. So I think I've sort of jumped around a little bit there, Corinne, but I just want to acknowledge within all of that the panellists before me have certainly presented some really, really strong, important issues for us globally that we need to address as a community of people who have a voice that we can use a little bit better, I think.
Thank you, Andree. Look, I have other questions, but I think it would probably be more interesting with the rest of the time to open the floor, open up the floor and see if there's any questions either online or from the audience here. And I just also want to acknowledge Paul Power, who's joined us. Paul's the CEO of the Refugee Council of Australia. So welcome, Paul. We're very happy to have you here with us.
We've got a comment from Linda Achor, currently in Malaysia. So she's tuning in from Malaysia, and she's a teacher by profession and an advocate for empowering women and girls here in Malaysia, but she's also a community leader for the Central African refugees in Malaysia. She would like to first plead for this panel to see the situation of women in Cameroon, especially southern Cameroon, empowering them and equally the rights for education for girls. She notes that here in this part of southern Cameroon, there are men being killed, especially from the ages of 25 years and above, living their lives with their wives and children vulnerable at the moment. And equally, education in this part of their country has stopped. And so it is an issue that is shared in many parts of the world. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment. Thank you for alerting us to that. All right, I would like to open up the floor. If anyone has a question, Alopi online, are you just going to grab questions from the chat or can people ask?
Can I raise their hand? So
I've got a question from Philomena, yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to the panel. And I am the Chair of Trustees for Edmund Rice Education Australia, and like Andree, first female to hold that role, and very proud of the responsibility, really, in stewarding such roles. I really appreciated the comments of the whole panel, Rita in particular, and Najeebah speaking about Afghanistan. And I'd like to bring to the attention of everybody two young Afghani women, they're twins actually, Lisa and Tam, who arrived from Kabul on that fateful day with some members of their family, but who've attended Jimmy's St James College, one of our schools, for 2 years, and are now at university in Melbourne. In 2 years, they've advanced themselves through, because I think it's important to find those little rays of hope. And these women, and I was caught up with them as little as 3 weeks ago, because they said, they text me, we're in Melbourne, we want a place to university, now we need a place to live. And they found a place to live, etc. My question is, what is the avenue? They're both passionate, very articulate, very committed to the voice of women. And what is the avenue for those young women to continue to raise the voice? And again, they said it's not just Afghani women, Phil, it's all women there. So what is the avenue for them? They're at uni now, and I know that they will be active at uni. But is there another avenue, Rita or Najeebah, that you would like to suggest for them, etc.? So a good news story and a plea for how can we get these young women, particularly because they're early 20s, I think, to be a voice of the next generations. Thank you.
Do you want me to answer that, Najeebah, or you got something to want to say?
I'm happy to add after you, Rita.
Okay. First of all, to hearing that news, it's actually made my International Women's Day exciting, happy, another glimmer coming in my face. As you say, after 15th of August, we as an organization, Women Empowerment Leadership, our teams managed to get 600 family out of Afghanistan, and continuously we're getting a woman out. Yesterday, just day before, we got 4 women in Brisbane. The thing is, those one, they are in the middle of a study, or they are in going to university, and they've got a passion for women rights, because I think most of the women, I've seen 80% of women coming from Afghanistan, they want to do something back for the country. And especially those ones coming after 15th of August, trying to get connected with the organization around of your area and close to you. And I'm sure everywhere there is someone to mentor, to give you mentorship, basically. And the other things, find an organization in your community, another woman do something for another woman. And I'm more than happy if they want to reach out to work with them. We have got a scholarship program. I'm starting it from 2019 for PhD students. My PhD students just qualified it from this year from Afghanistan, and we running this sort of workshops and also meeting, breakfastings and online, and I'm just getting in touch with them. So how they're going, because they're studying PhD, and most of their study is women in leadership, women empowerment. So they love to talk with them to get like basically more of research, see what's Afghan woman thinking, what's Afghan woman's idea on that sort of things. And I've got one woman, she just moved to United Nations, but she was from Brisbane. And we do have that sort of opportunity to introduce them for different entity. I'm more than happy to have a chat with her, see how we're going to work with her, especially if the background is journalist or their background's working in the media. I just love to be in contact with them, because I want to make this one is a different platform for women who have got a passion for women voice or women right, or as any associated with women empowerment, to how to empower women from Afghanistan. And I'm sure Najeebah, she's got something to her mind as well to add it up. But congratulations, thank you so much for what you're doing for Afghan women, not just for Afghan, for women.
Thanks, Rita. Najeebah, did you want to add something?
Yeah, sure. First of all, I wanted to acknowledge, the great example that you just provided. I think while we are speaking of circumstances and situations like in Iran that Azam was mentioning, like myself and Rita in Afghanistan, that are quite disheartening, I think it's also quite important to emphasize, the kind of support that international organizations, international individuals can actually build in supporting, the situation of women and girls, whether they're Afghan or Iranian or Rohingya, and for many other crisis conflicted zones. I think it's an absolutely tremendous great example that you just gave. That when we are able to promote education, particularly for women who have faced discrimination and inequality in access to education in their own native countries like Afghanistan, how it becomes an ongoing struggle even to the right of education when they come to a country of resettlement. But being able to provide that environment of support, we are able to really bring, to create an enabling environment where every individual, regardless of whether you're a refugee or asylum seeker or an Australian citizen, you can connect, to the community. You can build, a connection to the place that you feel like belonging. So with that, what I would like to say again is that, in my journey as a refugee woman, I have really witnessed the transformative power of education that it can make. It's just not a means to acquire knowledge, but more importantly, I would say for my women, for Afghan women, it's really about, a pathway of hope. For many of Afghan women that currently in the country or in transit countries like Pakistan and Indonesia and Malaysia and Iran and so on, many of these women have lost their hope. For us, one of the biggest struggle to work with Afghan women is how do we restore hope? How do we create a pathway to peace? How do we create a formidable force against, this injustice of equality, the Taliban regime, the seeds of future conflict, and so on do we create? And I think it is the education that really becomes, the hope, the source of resilience, because it really does empower individuals, particularly for women, by providing them skills. You've just mentioned someone being in school for 2 years and already in university. So you can see that level of contribution that these women can make once they are given, the space to learn, once they're given the right to seek asylum, once they're provided, with the right to protection of permanent residency, like in a country in Australia. All of this will allow them not only to learn, to empower and upskill themselves, to foster critical thinking, to have a sense of agency, but more importantly, once we invest in education for these women, they're not just going to provide and contribute back to the country, they're going to become the future of that nation. But I think the question around what are the avenues, like, for those young, passionate women or women to raise their voice, there are several things that I would love to mention. And it really comes from my experience working with many women and refugee women. So one is that, how do we facilitate ongoing and sustained access to strategizing and decision-making processes at every level? So what I mean by that is that, how do we ensure that these women have a level of participation to the conversation and dialogues that we are having right now? Most often when we speak to women in Australia who are resettled here, whether they're Tamil women, Rohingya women, Afghan women, Iranian women, they tend to tell us about the continuous ad hoc moments of ad hoc consultations that these women are being invited to. So this is not a way of, hearing women's voices. This is not a way of amplifying women's voices when it's only about inviting them to a limited ad hoc consultation that doesn't really enable this woman, to influence or deeply inform the direction of responses that impacts their lives. So for me, instead of institutions and organizations and individual refugee advocates, what they need to do is that they need to facilitate ongoing access to spaces where we are making decisions about, the lives of refugee women. So let's go beyond consultation. Let's ensure that, within our leadership and governance structures, we are having mechanisms that supports, engagement that transfers power and ownership. Most often when we talk about storytelling, when we talk about, shaping the narrative, when we're talking about inviting Afghan women to speak, it shouldn't only be about storytelling. Storytelling is super important when it's about evidence building, but how do we go beyond that transfers power and ownership? The second thing I think that I want to mention quite quickly is, how do we facilitate their level of preparedness so that they can engage meaningfully? Most often we invite, refugee women to platforms and dialogues without ensuring that there's a level of preparedness for their engagement. Like, to what extent do we include trainings? To what extent do we include, mentorship programs for these women so that they feel ready, so that they have that confidence to come and speak about their stories? How do we create opportunities for facilitating preparedness? Is super important when we talk about engaging Afghan women or any refugee women when it comes to the work that we do. How do we start participating? How do we start engaging and participating to a level that they are positioned and prepared as equal partners? And I think the third and the fourth, which I will say very quickly, is, again, I think we all know, in Australia and in many other foreign countries and Western countries that I have worked around the globe, there is one problem. And that problem is, how do we bring self-reflection to us as individuals with privilege and power, or as institutions and entities? And how do we enact changes that dismantle the power dynamic? One of the biggest issues right now that excludes, refugee women or women from, any conversation is about the power dynamics, the imbalanced power dynamics that exist. So again, my suggestion and my recommendation is that we need to start getting entities and individuals to really identify and change internal practices that make engagement safe, that make engagement productive. We need to ensure that they're feeling safe and secure to come and be part of the society. And for that, we might need, an internal change that includes, for example, contracting an expert in equity, diversity, and inclusion to come and diagnose the organization and train the staff, for instance. Or it might require as an individual to self-reflect, what kind of privilege do you have and how do you want to share that? And I'm going to stop with last point. most often we tend to ask a lot of Afghan women, refugee women, migrant women to come and speak to us and to share their stories, but there's an issue. We tend to forget that many of these people have already worked decades of voluntarily back in their home countries, back in transit countries before they were resettled. And now we're doing that again in the resettled countries. We're expecting them to come and participate without understanding that, participation requires financial support. So are you willing to finance refugee participation so that they can come in? Are you willing to provide grant opportunities that funds, for their time and their expertise and their travel fees and all of that? So these are some of the avenues that I think is important. Sorry, Karen, I've been over. Thank you.
Thanks, Najeebah. What you made some excellent points. And the issues that you raise are issues that are very familiar to the Edmund Rice Center. It's really our bread and butter, what you're talking about. In Farid, myself and Alopi have been talking a lot in recent months about there being a space for us to possibly engage to support women's advocacy, particularly Iranian and Afghani women's advocacy. So we're keen to explore that space further. If that's something that you think would be useful as well. We've just got time. I feel like we could, easily spend another hour sort of exploring those issues. But we don't have the time available, unfortunately. But we do have time for one last question before we finish the event.
If no one has a question, I wanted to ask a question of Azam.
Sure.
Obviously, and sorry, it's a lot like if you can't see me, I'm off camera. But Azam, it was very interesting your points on what's happening in Iran at the moment. And I guess we face a real challenge in Australia being so far away from what is happening.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you, as a woman, how you would like to see us as Australians stand in solidarity with the women of Iran at the moment. And partly because Iran holds a particular place internationally in the way in which it is seen and in the way in which it is perceived internationally. And in that, we sometimes lose sight of the fact that we have this solidarity as humans with people of Iran.
Yes, yes.
And we need to stand up, particularly with the women of Iran at this time. And so I thought I'd ask you the question, how can we best do that at this point in time?
I think I actually thought about that, and I'm listening to this conversation about the how do we make change. And I think when I was thinking and reflecting back, the first question is that in Iran, we need to remove the regime because, there could be changes that we may propose, but it would be prevented by Iranian regime. So really, and I know it's kind of like black and white, but unfortunately, there's no way around it because as long as that establishment is in place, it would be really difficult to make any improvement or changes. But I think it's not as simple as that. I think we put that aside. I think one of the ways that I've seen and I know because of my brother leading one of the resistance units in Iran is they doing a lot of work that basically they stay very close with what happens in Iran, and they've got a group of people that have been in this since the revolution in France that really work really hard. It's basically Najeebah and Rita, the organization is really dedicated to freeing Iran. So I think that would be one thing that we could do to understand how they helping and where we can help. But I think in terms of international community, I think we need to stop taking the soft approach with Iranian government and making sure, because it's not working. We've seen that, there's no conversation after Masa's movement, but really no meaningful changes are happening. So what can we do to make sure that we lend our support to either resistance units that are very active and I know what's going on, or internationally, how can we basically challenge Iranian government to open the door? I mean, if even possible, I mean, I'm kind of now going back from removing to opening the door and even understanding what's going on in there, because I think Iranian government, as you can see in the world, playing a very strong, powerful role in a lot of, I guess, I wouldn't say bad things, but a lot of things that are happening in Middle East, in, even with Russia and Ukraine. So how do we take a bit more forceful approach with the government and I don't know the answer, but I think that would be kind of where we can be more effective. That's what I would say. But I think, it is very challenging. It is very challenging as long as this establishment is in place to make any meaningful changes.
Thank you, Azam. I hope that all our speakers feel that they have had the space to express and talk about some of the issues that are important to them, and that you feel that you've been heard today and that you have solidarity in this room. As I said before, the Edmund Rice Centre looks forward to engaging in further discussions about whatever role we can play in this space in Australia. So thank you very much. We have a special little ceremony now for some very special women that are joining us today. And I want to hand over to Alopi. If you're still on the screen, you're welcome to stay, or you can leave now if you wish. But thank you to everybody for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Farid. So as part of International Women's Day, we like to recognise women who've made a very strong contribution to our work at the Edmund Rice Centre. And so for that, we've asked to present 3 women today with acknowledgement. The first is Rita Anwari. Rita, in recognition of your exceptional looking to the goals of the Edmund Rice Centre, Rita has served as a communications project officer for many years. And for many of those who are subscribers to our newsletter, Rita works diligently to pull together a lot of the material that is there, that people really benefit from in terms of keeping abreast of the issues on social justice. That is part of the information we provide. So Rita, thank you very much. The next person I'd like to call up is Marge McMullen. It's a recognition of your outstanding dedication and commitment to the Edmund Rice Centre mission and goals. Marge's voluntary service has been invaluable, and her passion for social justice, particularly in helping refugees and people seeking asylum, has greatly benefited our organisation and the communities that we work with, as well, I think, as Australia, as a country. You're an example of what Australia should be, Marge, and I congratulate you on that. So. The last is Vijay Dayanathan. Vijay, in recognition of your exceptionally dedicated and its work, particularly in some of the work we've done recently on with the Tamil community and others on people knowing their rights in Australia, and that was a set of workshops we did. Vijay has played a vital role as a community leader, assisting in the organisation of community events and advocating for refugees. So thank you, Vijay, on behalf of the Edmund Rice Centre.
A little present for Azam.
Oh, yes, sorry. Azam, a very small, sorry, I had that. And others, we will be sending our other speakers a little gift from behalf of the centre. But Azam, thank you for being part of our we have such great women in our midst, and I'm truly blessed to work with such great women as part of my work. And I wanted to acknowledge all of you today in the room, particularly some of the sisters who are here from the orders. Thank you for being here. From the women from the Iran community and other communities, thank you for being here. We really, really appreciate this being part of our day that we want to call our day, even though it's International Women's Day. It's also a day that we all share with you and we want to celebrate. So thank you very much. We might call it an end there, but give yourselves a big clap. Everyone online.